right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the Lowdown. I know it's April and folks are busy. So for those of you catching the recording, we appreciate you being here as well. First off, I just want to remind you guys that we're able to offer the Lowdown because of the support of folks like you. And so if you feel so called to throw a little bit in the kitty to help us keep putting these webinars on, it would sure be appreciated. Of course, we always offer these for free, but even $5 or $10 if you feel like you got something valuable out of it helps us continue to put these resources together for y'all. And the donation link is in the chat. Thank you. All right. So we're going to, just a reminder, we're going to do introductions of our guests here, and we'll have a little bit of Q&A between Alex and myself, and then we will leave the last 15 minutes for audience question and answers. So go ahead and pop questions in the chat as they come up. We'll be collecting those, and then we'll have time to let you guys ask your questions at the bottom of the hour. Oh, it looks like we just had someone else join us. Hello, Zeke Berg. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on the Lowdown. I think folks are busy right now because it's April, so we don't have a lot of live attendees this week, but we are recording this and we'll post the recording. So thanks for joining us. All right, we have some community agreements to make sure that the convo stays friendly, productive, and interesting. So those should be dropped in the chat if they haven't been already. The TLDR of the community agreements is be chill, my babies, be thoughtful, be kind, be smart. All right, welcome to the Lowdown. I am your host, Beth Robinette. I'm joining you from the Lazy R Ranch, just west of Spokane, Washington, where I raise grass-fed beef with my dad. We're also joined with my esteemed co-host, Alex Miller of Lick Skillet Farm. People are trickling in. They're just busy. Alex, I always introduce you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Nope.
Well, Alex is a cool guy, has a ton of experience. He's a professor of business and also a farmer in his own right, and has been a longtime supporter of the Good Meat Project. So we sure appreciate you having you with us today. And of course, we are joined by our super rad guests today, Petrina and Sarah. Petrina Fisher is the development manager for Washington Farmland Trust. She also has 2 decades of experience in fundraising, administration, and nonprofit evaluation. And she owns and operates Skylight Farms in Snohomish, Washington, which is a diversified vegetable operation. And Sarah Lemon is joining us from the WSDA, that's Washington State Department of Agriculture Regional Markets team. She works as a local meat marketing specialist there, and she's also worked in the oil industry, but she started her livestock career working at Heifer Ranch, which is the headquarters of Heifer International's program outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. And so she also has some on-the-ground experience. And I appreciate both of you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit today about how to approach this sometimes intimidating, confusing, hard to navigate world of fundraising to get money to make your farm work. And I know that there's a lot of options out there, so we're hoping to bring a little clarity and direction to folks today. I'm going to kick it over to Alex for our first question. Take it away, boss. So
can you give us just a lay of the land of what would be the major different pockets of fundings that are out there? Is it just to give us some language to talk about it for the rest of the conversation? Either one of you can take a shot at that. We're pretty informal.
Well, I can jump in. The way I see it, kind of maybe hierarchically, there's like federal funding or USDA funding, and then there's state funding that usually comes from the Department of Ag. And then there's all this sort of other funding, like family foundations are often good places, whether that's like the Waltons or up here in Washington, it's the Russell Family Foundation. There's foundations all across the country. And then there's sort of research funding, like SARE, which I'm going to forget what the acronym for SARE stands for, but it's like this.
Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education.
Thank you. Yes. So there's like SARE funding, and then there's funding like research funding through like Noble, the Noble Institute out of Ardmore, Oklahoma, or the Rodale Institute. There's kind of those more private funding, and then sometimes people grant funding is great, but there's also a lot of loans out there, and I think it's important for people to think about bridge funding. There's sort of a resurgence of kind of community funding, values-based funding of organizations that want to help you get grants or help you finance these reimbursement style grants that we're seeing a lot of.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that, depending on your local community, there are going to be like potentially through a conservation district. I don't know how it's set up in other states, but here in Washington, there are local conservation districts that have some grant programs specific to various projects. And sometimes those annual priorities can change on a year-to-year basis. But also, like, sometimes the university extensions can help navigate kind of the realm of opportunities that are out there. And some of our like local kind of more farming support organizations like the Tilth Alliance or Snow Valley Tilth, they have listservs. And so it's great to be a part of those, and different opportunities will pop up from time to time. And they could be, from a private entity like a foundation, even like on the rare, in the rare instance, like a business. But I think we're mostly thinking about the kind of the government structure from like the federal, state, county level for this conversation.
A big takeaway from your comments is that once you move away from the federal funding, everything gets pretty state or even community specific. But one thing you can do is just get your name on all the lists. They're not going to come looking for you. So you sort of have to put your name forward and get on those lists and get on the email list. And then, of course, doing the networking thing as well. So a big part of fundraising, and at least in my experience, has been just finding out who's got money, when's it going to come available, what kind of things do they want to fund. And that's just groundwork you have to do on your own. Because most of the time, they're not going to come looking for you. So I appreciate that input. Beth, you want to take a question?
Yeah, I was just curious if there are any kind of like centers to try and find that information, like places where that information is being aggregated, to like kind of, just start.
Yeah, that would be really nice.
Or if no one's doing that, can we do that?
Well, like at least in Washington, like the Tilth Alliance does a pretty good job of collecting any opportunities and pushing it out to their to their listserv. So yeah, I would definitely recommend like the networking for sure, getting on every single list that's out there. And sometimes you'll get a lot of other information if you sign up for like and NRCS newsletters and things like that, but you'll find the pieces of information on funding there. So yeah, I don't think there's really like a clearinghouse necessarily, and it is pretty community specific. So but yeah, some of the university extensions too can help you figure out like what are the lists that I need to sign up for, and they can just kind of point you in that right direction.
Sarah, you started to mention a trend there on one of those sources of funding, the local money that was more values-based money. Are there other trends that you could identify with the different pockets of money that we ought to be aware of? And I should hasten to say, trends in Washington may not be indicative of what's going on in the rest of the nation, but we'd still be interested in any trends that you've observed.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say the trend, and this is going to be a big jargon word, is heading towards value chains or like value chain coordination. And there's a whole value chain coordination like workforce out there that you can Google. There's like a community of practice that you can check on, but it's looking at everything from like the farm gate all the way through to local regional sales outlets like small grocers, food hubs, that sort of thing. I think a lot of the farms or a lot of the grants that are out there and our grant here in Washington as well are trying to strengthen every single part of that. And so they're looking for projects that have those connections already built in. They're looking for people that are already working with other farmers or maybe with a small food processor or something like that. So I think we're at a point where, unfortunately, because it's a lot of effort and I know you're busy farming, but sometimes those connections come up naturally where you're, talking with your butcher shop or whatever. But yeah, people are interested in funding projects that are more than just kind of, cold storage on the farm that have a bigger food systems impact.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Go ahead, Patricia.
Oh, I was going to say, I'd say that another trend that I'm seeing is also just like the kinds of farms that are, that funders are wanting to support. And so there's at least in Washington and perhaps like nationally as well, but there seems to be a shift in, elevating the work of socially and, social justice or focused like organizations or farms and just creating more racial equity in the way that funds are distributed. So I think there's just kind of a recognition that like the history of agriculture has been disproportionately supportive of certain populations. And so there is kind of an effort to, consider the demographics of not only the owners of the farmers, but like the community that the farm might serve.
Yeah, I think the demographics of the farmer at least are heavily weighed these days in anything that's related to federal money. I know that's the case for both SARE and the latest round of USDA value-added producer grants and capital grants. I think are all awarding significant points for those traditionally less recognized communities that now are getting more attention. So those are both good points. Thank you.
So I'm curious if you have any ideas about like strategies for like, okay, so you've combed through, you've gathered information about these funding sources that are available through your spidery networks and various listservs. How would you recommend folks craft a strategy around like what grants to apply for? Is it kind of like a shotgun, like just try and get as much grants out there as possible and see what you win? Or what would you recommend for people?
Well, I think, we all have pretty limited time. I think, I farm, but I also have an off-farm job. I know that's the case for a lot of people who probably are going to, listen to this webinar. And so I think the key is really looking at the grants and do they fit your needs? And, that scattershot approach is kind of like, well, if I, send out all these applications, I'm more likely to get funding, but then you have to think that you're shifting time away from things that you could be doing otherwise, in other parts of your life or on your farm. And so I think it just always starts with like having a really solid understanding of like what your current needs and priorities are and like what's really attainable in the time period of this said grant. And so if it's something like, okay, I have this long-term project that I want to do. It's not really the most important thing, but I see there's a funding opportunity. I think there's just that you kind of need to prioritize on where that fits some things might need to shift around in order to apply for that. But yeah, I think that's one of the pitfalls of writing grants is maybe being successful in a grant and then not being able to execute it because you kind of really weren't prepared to carry it out. So yeah.
I very much second that.
Yeah, I think it's always a good reminder that like there's some level of like administrative work that goes along with a grant. Sometimes it's really minimal and you just need to like submit a really simple one-page report, and sometimes that's pretty, I mean, often depends on the source of the funding too. Like I know federal grants often require pretty extensive reporting, and there's a lot of time that goes into telling the government how you spent their money, and so you have to be prepared to do that. And then Alex, I noticed you shook your head. You had a very strong reaction when I asked about scattergun approach. So methinks you have some insight on this question.
Yeah, I have some pretty strong opinions about this one. We have a financial goal, an annual financial goal of a certain amount of funding to be raised every year through grants. So it is a big part of our operation. And I've got several pointers I could offer. A really practical matter. If you're going after cost share money, think through the cash flow implications of that. If you have to spend all the money up front before you can bill the first dime of it, for most people, there's going to be a pretty severe limit on how much you can actually chase just because you can't flow the loan. This is especially frustrating because, at least in Tennessee, a lot of our state money is targeting distressed communities. Those are the very communities that don't have the money to spend, and they're being told, well, you can get cost reimbursement, but you got to spend all the money up front. So it's a catch-22. Another one that's really frustrating is be careful what you ask for. And some of these proposals, some of these grant sources, you can't buy anything but new equipment. All right. Well, think about that. If you needed a new reefer truck, you could spend $100,000 on a new one or $20,000 on a used one. You spend $100,000 on a new one so that you qualify for the cost share. They reimburse you 50%. You got $50,000 tied up in a truck where a $25,000 truck would have done you just fine. So we have a policy that we only chase stuff that we can't get used, like bathrooms. State of Tennessee is big on building bathrooms on farms, gravel, roofs on buildings, stuff that you just can't get used. That's a primary target for us because they will only cost you on the new stuff. Look at the way the points are being assigned. There will be a section in the RFP that says points will be assigned this way, and see if you have an advantage. If you don't have an advantage, you might consider going after one where you do have an advantage. And what's this last one? Oh, read the proposal really carefully without any presumptions. We got turned down on I think it's a $20,000 grant from the state of Tennessee last year because they said, oh, what you're proposing to bring people to your farm to do, the committee decided that doesn't fit our agenda. They would pay for me to bring people on the farm to fish. We don't produce fish, but if we had a fish pond, they'd pay for that. Or do a corn maze. But when we wanted to bring them on the farm to teach them how to cook grass-fed meat, they said, no, that's cooking. That's not agriculture. It drove me nuts. Just drove me nuts. But you just have to. And they said, if you read the language carefully, it says, that this is what we'll support. I couldn't find it in there anywhere. So those are my 4 tips that I would offer. Back to this. The bottom line is, do not just take a scattergun approach. Be very intentional on what you pursue. It would be my advice.
Yeah, and some funders, I was going to say, some funders are pretty open. So if you have an idea, you can call them up or send them an email and say, hey, this is my idea for this grant proposal. Does it fit? And they will give you their honest answer. And so you might need to kind of refine your approach. And if it really doesn't fit, don't apply. It's a waste of time because funders get at least 10 times the number of applications for all the dollars that they have. And so you don't want to waste your time if they say, no, this is not a good fit.
Yeah. And put yourself in the shoes of the committee that has to allocate all this money. They've got a stack of 100 proposals and they're going to fund 10 of them. First thing they're doing is give me some reason to throw this one off my desk. So if you've got something that is out of compliance with their RFP or just doesn't fit, they're delighted to move that off the desk and get down to the short list that they're actually going to have to study and spend time with. It's giving away money is really hard work, and there's no point in competing for money that you're not a really good fit for, in my experience.
Yeah. And sometimes it just comes down to little technicalities too.
Mhm.
I know like with federal grants, sometimes they have very, very strict page limits,
Exactly.
spacing limits, font size, margin sizes. And if you are using single spacing, when they specifically say space and a half, they'll just discard your application without even reading it. So it is really, really important to read all those guidelines and know exactly what the funder wants. Don't try to fudge those margins. They'll know.
It's not like my 12th grade English class or whatever.
No.
Yeah, I'm curious if Sarah, you or Petrina have any other just like best practices for writing a successful proposal. It sounds like read the RFP very carefully and make sure that you are answering the questions as they are asked is like a number one thing. And making sure that you're a good fit for the proposal in the first place.
I wanted to add in kind of an important piece about the funding is that often this is counted as taxable income against your operation, or depending on how you're set up, that might be your personal taxes. And so planning that out when you're putting in an application is really important, so that you don't wind up with a big tax bill at the end of the year for stuff that you thought was quote unquote free money, or for the way people describe about it. That's just not the case. So keep that in mind.
I'll give you a best practice from a different industry and academe. I know here at the university, I mean, pursuing federal grants is just a way of life for us. And I was on one. Admittedly, it was a pretty large grant. It's a $45 million proposal. We spent $114,000, I think that's right, preparing the proposal. 114. And people in industry that were used for competing for this money said that's ridiculously low. They couldn't believe that we weren't spending more. Give you an idea of how carefully the proposal was written. We had everybody on the proposal team spend 2 days together. We read every single sentence of the RFP, every single sentence, and then we had to identify where was that issue addressed in the proposal by line. Then we did the reverse. We read every single line of the proposal and said, where is this addressing something in the RFP? It was excruciating. I thought I was going to shoot myself. But to the professional grant writers, they just said, hey, that's what you do. That's what you do.
Yeah, I think kind of rule of thumb, like the larger the dollar amount that you're asking for, probably the more time you're going to spend on that grant proposal. That's not always the case, but for sure, like, federal grants are probably the most complex. And then you kind of go down from there. The private funder in your community might have like a 2-page application or a 5-page narrative, but it's not going to be as technical. And so, like for me, grant writing is a very, very, major part of my job at the Farmland Trust. And I write grants of all sizes from all different kinds of funders. And so, the process for me, like really starts at just organizing myself and just like being really meticulous again, like reading that RFP really super carefully and using that like as an outline for my grant proposal. And so I literally will just like copy and paste if there are, every grant, RFP will have like, it'll give you a structure of like, these are all the sections, these are the things that we're looking for. I literally just copy and paste those into a document and I work from there and make sure that I'm answering every single question, and just trying not to miss anything. And, sometimes it can feel really overwhelming when you have a big proposal to write. And so I feel like breaking it into sections and making a schedule for yourself. You don't necessarily need to start at the beginning. I think like for me, a strategy is often like working on the easiest thing and knocking that out right away and feeling like, okay, I've got that under my belt. Now I'm going to work on something that's harder. And just making sure you have a lot of time to do it. Sometimes you look at those applications and you're like, oh, I could just do that in a weekend, but it just takes so much longer than you think it would. Even like a really simple application probably takes at least 10 hours. to pull together. If you have like existing narrative, if you're creating it all from scratch, it's just going to take a lot longer than that. And so, yeah,
I,
and just because,
I hear
oh,
what you're
sorry.
saying, but I want to insert something here. I think
Yeah.
what you're saying is absolutely true of most big proposals, but don't shy away from the small proposals that are real quickies. There was some federal money associated with the pandemic. It didn't take us 20 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to fill out the application online. It's 4 questions. It's $20,000. 4 questions, 10 minutes, $20,000. That was completely atypical. Generally, we won't even go after federal money because it is such a pain. But there are exceptions to that. So don't you have to sort of do your work and be willing to figure out what makes sense for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if they're easy, I say go for them, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's only going to take you an hour to fill something out, then for sure you're not risking much. You should definitely apply for that.
One other thing is the state money is increasingly, at least in Tennessee, you have to fill out everything on a web form, and those are notoriously unstable. They're very poorly done. So my best practice there is get all that stuff, move it over to Word or something, so that when you finally get ready, all you're doing is cutting and pasting. Don't work on their web platform. It's we've had too many times where the seventh time we finally got everything to click, and we were just re-entering stuff over and over again. So those are horrible, at least in Tennessee.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I never work on things on web forms. I always, especially if you're trying to have other people review it,
Yeah.
it's like it's almost impossible to have other people review a web form.
So I know AI is having a moment right now. I have been getting cozy with my robot overlord personally, and using it to lift some of the like daily busy work of writing things I don't want to put brain power towards writing. So I'm curious, like thoughts on using Chat GPT for grant proposals? Are you doing it? Is it scary? Is it good idea, bad idea? Thoughts?
I mean, it's a tool like anything else. It's not like the silver bullet. You can't just like put a couple ideas in and crank out a beautiful proposal. But for me, I use it to help edit. And also like on days that I don't really feel super inspired, I might just like put in some sentence fragments or just some ideas and tell ChatGPT to, write a paragraph with these ideas and just kind of see if that gets the juices flowing. It's also really good for helping you stay within word counts. So a lot of grant proposals will say, tell us, about, your project in 500 words. It's like, what do you mean 500 words or 200 words? And so if you are getting to the point where you've like just been staring at the same paragraph for way too long, it's a great thing to just throw in Chat GPT and say, revise this paragraph to 500 words or less and see what it spits out. And, often you'll like some of the wording and you won't like some of it. And so I just tend to use the pieces that, that I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of saying it that way, and, incorporate that into what I'm writing. But there, you do have to be careful about using it because it's not always accurate. It just, it's just like crawling the web to find information if you're asking it questions. So you just have to be sure to like verify any things that look like they're facts or statistics to make sure that there's a credible source that it comes from. Yeah, just realize that it's not a good thing to just copy and paste from, because it kind of has a pretty, at least in my experience, it feels like it has a kind of specific writing style, and that might not be your writing style. And then it becomes a little bit jarring if you're reading a narrative and all of a sudden there's this, Chat GPT generated paragraph that doesn't fit with the rest of the proposal.
You can definitely tell that it's generated by ChatGPT. Like there's telltale signs. I totally agree that it's a solid starting point and a good way to get kind of a place to start from, and then really do your homework and curate a narrative that is true to you.
Yeah,
Mm.
I did use it recently for like to write a grant proposal, and my experience was, yeah, if you already have like a good bullet point idea of what you want to say, and you're not getting like the cogs to line up to like turn that into paragraphs, it's pretty helpful for that. I also think like you get out what you put in to chat gpt, so like the more detail and the more specific and high quality your prompt is, the better the product is. um I also found it super useful for getting to a certain word count, like when I was like, oh, this is way too long. Well, I kind of dumped like my entire website's text into chat gpt, and then I was like, write a one-page narrative about why this organization is great. And it did like a pretty good job of taking all of that word vomit I had already written in a bunch of different contexts, and then I was like, okay, I need that to be like 300 words, and it does a good job of shrinking it down. But it also definitely has a particular writing style that um is pretty solidly mediocre. Like it's not beautiful writing or like particularly strong writing or like moving, um, which isn't always necessary for a grant proposal. Sometimes it's very technical, flat type of writing. So yeah, I think also just like fact checking everything at the end to make sure that, yeah, because it does have like it fills in the blanks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
I
other,
found it really useful. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say the other thing to remember too is that when you put stuff into GPT, Chat GPT, is that you're now putting things into the public domain. And
Mm,
so, in terms of like personal, really personal private information, you don't want to put that into Chat GPT and
great.
ask it to, incorporate that into your narrative. That's something you should do on your own. And then also like on the flip side, it knows nothing about your enterprise or your operation. And so if you're using ChatGPT, having that, specific information, like you already have stuff on a website, great. Or like social media posts, you can pull some of those things that you've already written are already, existing online, and just like have it mush them all together um, into, for your purposes.
Hmm. Can we get a little bit more granular on the notion of what are the costs and the risk associated with pursuing this? And I know I'm going to ask you to do something really difficult. Answer that question from the perspective of a farmer or producer, rancher, just getting into the grant, right? Maybe this is their first time that they've ever stuck their toe in the water. What are going to be the costs that obviously they're going to say, well, I got my time. But what are the costs that they might not have seen, and what are some of the risks that they might not be aware of as newbies to this whole field?
Once you're awarded a grant, you definitely want to be aware of the requirements for reimbursement. That's something that is so tough as a grant manager. So that sometimes people submit things and they didn't read the guidelines or didn't read them close enough, and there's an expense that's just not reimbursable. Like for our grant, it has to be in reimbursement and it's from your contract date. So anything like, even if you paid for that section of fencing, 30 minutes before your grant started, that's not reimbursable. And so really understanding those guidelines so that you're actually making sure that you're getting reimbursed is super, super critical. And, prices have been changing so much with inflation. And so having reliable quotes, and then also trying to build into your grant some amount of flexibility so that you can complete the project, even if, things go up by 5 or 7%. Whether that's, you build that into the grant amount that you've padded in, or you have some other funding source, or, are able to even do like a Kickstarter or ask friends and family to get you through to that end point. Because some of these grants, you have to finish the project too and have things on the ground and in use before you can get reimbursed for them. So that's definitely a risk.
On the follow through, I want to just underline that Tennessee last year participated in the state came up with some money that was going to match federal money, but the guidelines, since there was federal money involved in it, you had to adhere to federal acquisition regulations, the FAR. The FAR, if you don't know it, is 65,000 pages of regulation, 65,000. And you're expected to adhere to that. What Tennessee found is of the dozen grants that they made, they only had one recipient that they felt confident was actually going to be able to adhere to the FAR. People just got into this and didn't realize, you mean I've got to get 3 quotes? And then I've got to justify which one I go with if it's not just obviously the cheap. And it was a tremendous train wreck for some of the recipients of that money. They're still trying to scratch their head and figure out what they're going to do about it.
Well, and there's requirements like Buy America, Build America for some of these federal dollars, where there's limits on where you can source actual materials from even. So being aware of all that stuff is really critical.
Yeah. And I think you also did the right thing in stressing the start date is maybe the single biggest places you can mess up. We had won a REAP grant to reimburse us for investment in solar installation. The crew started 1 day early. Right. The feds came back and said, no, we're not doing any cost share on it. It's over. Project is over. They're not going to participate. It just drove us nuts. But,
well, it's to realize that, your grant project ends and there's usually a contract end date, but there may be requirements after that. Like our grant has a requirement that the equipment be in use for 3 years. And we're tracking that because, we have a fiscal obligation to our state dollars, to your tax dollars, to make sure that these grants are doing what they say they are. So definitely, I hear from a lot of people this sort of idea like, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, like I can just pay the grant back. One, how are you going to pay the grant back? And two, that has legal implications for your business, for your ability to get future grants. So really being real clear, like, can I actually fulfill this grant is essential.
What kind of records should folks be prepared to have together for grant application?
Well, financial records for sure.
Like a basic income statement, balance sheet, like.
In our grant, we don't need that.
Records of sales. Are there any things like that are?
I would say
I've never been asked for any.
A business is probably more what you need to have, some sort of business plan going forward.
It for all the state money in Tennessee right now, you have to put in a business plan, and they have a recommended template for it. But it's all about it. All they're asking about is what's going to happen, not what have you done. And I've never been asked for any. I take that back. We are regularly asked for a statement from our bank that, hey, these jokers can actually pay their part of this deal. And we have to, the banker has to write a letter and says, yep, they're in good standing, that they'll be able to swing it. That's the only record I've ever been asked for.
I think it depends on the funder. Some might ask you for like a copy of your business license or insurance for different kinds of projects that you're doing. And I think it's just good practice to have your books in order in case, your funder wants to see, receipts for, whatever things that you bought with the grant.
If you're applying as a nonprofit, Bob, means you got to have documentation that you are an approved nonprofit. I should have pointed that out.
Yeah. I mean, nonprofit grant writing is a slightly different beast than writing for your business. And there's just there's a lot more stuff that you would need if you're filing as a nonprofit organization.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, man.
No, I was gonna say, if you have one more question, go ahead, Al.
No,
okay. I was gonna say before
Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Sorry. Hi. I just wanted to throw out related to using outside resources that I've seen multiple times. There are lots of grant writers around, and the grant writing game is a well-worn path for a lot of people, and particularly like a USDA grant versus a state grant, and there's people that sometimes specialize. And I've seen multiple instances at Maple Hill, you know, all the way down to a smaller organization where grant writers will work with you on contingency and write a grant for a certain amount of dollars, and then if you get it, they get sort of, you know, they get a larger amount having won the grant. And sometimes it's depending on the size of the grant or the size of your farm or organization, it's really money well spent, because that may not be your highest and best use of time to learn that, when there's other people that really know how to do it and know the check boxes to check. And so just wanted to throw out there that it's something to look at, and usually you can find those people through networking with other people that do grants quite often, and somebody always knows somebody, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of the offices, when you're drafting your application, they'll actually look at it before you submit it, and they can give you some guidance on, like, you know, are you answering the questions appropriately? You know, did you miss anything? And if you have questions about, like, you know, just clarifying questions that, you know, in a lot of circumstances, you know, they do want you to get funded. And so, you know, they're willing to work with you to make sure you put in the best proposal.
Well, before we open it up for audience questions. Oh, first of all, I saw Meredith put in the chat, are there any resources for finding grant writers? My guess is no, but surprise me.
There are grant writing organizations, like at least here in Washington, there's the Puget Sound Grant Writers Association, and you can, there are, you know, lots of people there, so you can, you know, interview people. I imagine that there's similar resources, but, you know, a lot of this work is just done virtually now. And so you can really work with a grant writer anywhere in the country, for that matter, as long as they have the skill set. It's like not a problem to work with somebody who doesn't even like live in your city or state.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would love for each of you to just talk a little bit about the other work that you do with your organizations before we open it up for questions, because I know y'all both have pretty cool jobs. So Petrina, you want to just like tell me a little bit more about Washington Farmland Trust and what you do there, and also like
Sure.
there are resources that folks could find there that they might want to follow up with you afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. So Washington Farmland Trust has three main programs. We do farmland conservation, stewardship, and then we have a program called Farm to Farmer that works with farmers that are looking for land and connecting with landowners. And, you know, so conservation is kind of like how the organization really evolved, or, you know, how it was born, was, you know, trying to save and preserve farmland across Washington. And that we do through conservation easements, ag easements. And in some cases, we'll do a process called buy, protect, sell, where we'll buy a piece of property, put the conservation easements on it, do some improvements, and then sell it back to a farmer or a collection of farmers that want to purchase that land. And so the whole goal with that is to try to keep land, agricultural land, really affordable for farmers, and also just keep it in production and make sure that it can't be developed. So our stewardship program then kind of takes the next step and in stewarding those conserved properties. And so we have a team that supports the farmers on those conserved properties on, you know, various projects that they want to implement, and just, you know, making sure that they're able, you know, they're continuing to meet the obligations of their easements and that kind of thing. Our farm to farmer program is really cool. It takes a very personalized approach to working with farmers and really going deeply understanding what their challenges and needs are and their priorities for their businesses, and kind of what they're looking for in terms of finding land, whether it's like they're a startup operation or they're an expanding business, or we work with a lot of immigrants and refugees that have farming experience in their home countries and trying to help them get established on pieces of property. So yeah, and that program, the Farm to Farmer program, is just based in Washington State, but it is a free program, and so definitely encourage farmers to reach out if they're in the middle of a land search or thinking about trying to find land and need some technical support around that. So my role at the organization, I'm in the fundraising department, and I'd say more than half of my time is spent on doing grant research, grant writing, grant reporting, all of that stuff that goes around with the grant writing, but also supporting, all the other fundraising activities. I won't go into all the details here for the organization. But also, I have, as a farmer, I can also kind of shed some light on just, what it's like to be doing the work and using that experience to inform the work of the other parts of the organization. So, yeah, I mean, the Trust is a really great place to work. Everybody is very collaborative and, everyone just like they welcome all ideas. And so we all kind of work together and help each other out there.
Awesome. Same question for you, Sarah.
Yeah, so I work for the regional markets program at the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And kind of the whole mission vision behind regional markets is to support small and direct marketing farmers, so those people that are selling directly to the end consumer. And similar to the Washington Farmland Trust, we do that in a number of ways. Kind of our core programs right now are the Farm to School program, which supports obviously connecting farmers with schools and allowing school districts, helping them to understand how to buy and serve local foods in their school lunch and school breakfast programs. We also run the local food system infrastructure grant program, which is open right now. So if you're in Washington until April 17th, that grant is open. It's a smaller grant round this time, but it is available. And you can find more information about that at our website, which is agr.wa.gov/farmfoodbiz, which I'm not going to check. And then I work for the Meat and Poultry Assistance Program, which is a program that got started only about 2 years ago. So a new program designed to support small and direct marketing livestock producers. And then I also work a lot with small to mid-size processors that obviously are a key piece of the puzzle of getting meat from the field to the grocery store to people's plates. Yeah, and we do that through technical assistance. I also help manage a program called WAMEDA, which is a collaboration between WSDA and WSU Food Systems and WSU Extension Animal Sciences. And this year we're taking the WAMEDA truck. We've got this cool like mobile butchery truck that we're taking around the state, visiting with producers, trying to build the connections between the resources that are available at WSU main campus in Pullman. They have a meat processing facility there and meat science labs, trying to get those resources out around the state where people actually are, and hope to promote people being able to make a real business out of selling local meat and direct to consumer meat. So that's what we do. Our program's only unfortunately funded through the end of the biennium. So we're hoping, fingers crossed, to be able to continue. But yeah, I think there's similar programs like that around the country. And so getting in touch with your Department of Ag or definitely local extension services are good places to get connected to.
All right. Well, if any of our participants have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. It's that part of the hour. Otherwise, I'm going to just keep plugging away, I guess.
Well, and I put in the chat this upcoming grant opportunity from these regional food business centers. Folks may or may not have heard of these. It's a program running nationwide USDA has funded these sort of regional centers, regional food business center, around the US, and there's a good bit of funding. Like our Northwest Center has, I think, $30 million over 5 years to provide technical support and then also provide these business builder grants. It doesn't look like any of the business builder grants are open, but you can track it on that website. And these are, direct funding to support your business development. So definitely a new opportunity that's worth checking out.
Cool. Any other tips for like the forecast of where funding is headed? I know before we started the call, you kind of mentioned that I think we all saw that there was a lot of money that went out during the pandemic. And then now like that's kind of trickling off, at least from a federal standpoint. So where do you see things on that level?
Yeah. we talked a little bit before people jumped on about especially federal meat processing funding. So updates from folks, you've probably heard that the first round of the local MCAP, the meat processing capacity grant through USDA AMS was released. Don't worry, there are more grants from that grant funding cycle to be announced. That round was just the first initial round. There's been more grants coming out for both the equipment and the more extensive development processes. So if you're hoping, if you're looking at your local processor and hoping that they were going to get a grant, all hope is not lost. But it does seem like those will probably be the end of that funding. Doesn't seem like there's going to be much more meat processing capacity funding coming down the line. And to that end, folks may be hearing about the resilient food system infrastructure grants. All of these grant names sound incredibly similar. So if you're frustrated, you're not alone. They actually do just all sound the same. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me or a similar person in your state to ask. But that is the resilient food system infrastructure is unfortunately not available to meat producers. So, but there's still funds out there. There's still state dollars. Just maybe be a little more resourceful.
Yeah. Sources of funding that might be especially appropriate for folks who are attracted to the Good Meat Project just because of what they stand for and what they're interested in. Don't forget there's NRCS funding to improve environmental practices on your farm. And that's some of the easiest money to get. It's basically you commit to these practices and the money's going to be there, and that's easy. And also, if you're interested in trying some new ideas, I think the SARE grants that Sarah mentioned before are a nice opportunity. There's a whole branch of SARE funding specifically set aside for farmer research projects. They won't pay you to farm, but they will pay you to try innovative things or pay your expenses to do innovative things. And that's reasonably easy money to get as well if you happen to be doing something that fits with their interests. So those are two that I think for Good Meat Project folks might have some special appeal.
Yeah, I also put in the chat fact, Food Animals Concerned Trust. They have a Fund a Farmer program. And I think those grants are, they're pretty small, but I think those applications are less arduous than like a federal grant application. And on the federal grant application, I just wanted to also mention that if you've never applied for a federal grant, there are a whole bunch of steps that you need to do to get ready. You have to get registered. You need there's a whole rigmarole that you have to do, and it can be pretty time consuming because you kind of have to do in a specific order, and it's not always clear what the order is. So if you have any thought of any desire of applying to a federal grant, you got to make sure that you are registered and ready to go, and you do that well in advance of applying.
Google, is it SAM and done? Those are two things that you need to be aware of, and they are a process.
Yeah.
For the first time, you only do it once, so of course it's the first time for everybody, and they're horrible.
Right,
horrible.
But you do have to renew it every year.
Oh, well, that's okay.
Yeah. So
all right. I'm sorry to cut you off. We have 1 minute left. Wow, so much information, so useful. Thank you, Petrina and Sarah, both for your time. Thank you, Alex and Tim, for contributing your experience as well. We will send the recording out to folks along with a list of all of the resources that came up in this call. So we'll make sure that all gets. Watch the climate space. One last tip from Sarah Lemon. All right, I want to give Aubrey 1 second to plug office hours. So take it away.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. I'm Aubrey Gallegos. I'm the incoming programs manager for the Good Meat Project. And just real quick before we sign off, I wanted to briefly mention an opportunity for any farmers located in Washington State. Thanks to our partnership with the WSDA. Thanks, Sarah. Right now, we're offering free one-on-one office hours with our marketing consultants. So this is a great chance for farmers to get one-on-one conversations, have input and advice on your marketing strategy that's specific to your operation and your goals. And it's for any livestock producer, regardless of scale, where you're at in your business. If you're just starting out and could use some input as you're in the planning stages, or have an established business and you're looking to hone it or level up your marketing strategy, or anything in between. So we have really friendly, supportive consultants with a wide range of expertise who would be happy to work with you. And those are going to be available through the end of June. So definitely take advantage of those if you're in Washington State. And I'll drop a link in the chat to where you can sign up for those, and we'll also include it in the follow-up email. And you can also go to our website, goodmeatproject.org, and search office hours, and you will find those there. That's it. Thanks, Beth.
So good. Thank you, Aubrey. She's coming from a job. Oh, crap. All right. Thanks all. If you want to stick around on the call, Tim Joseph, as always, will be sharing his big, beautiful, wrinkly brain with us. You can chat with him about other things, funding and grant proposal related, or, just ask him how he's doing. He gives us a lot of his time. Maybe we could give a little care and time back to Tim Joseph. That said, I have to skedaddle because I'm double booked on a call. So I'm not sticking around for you, Tim, but I love you. Thank you all. Have a good one.